Vladimir Soloviev, the Russian writer, he said that it is time men realized their oneness with Mother Earth and rescued her from lifelessness so they can also save themselves from death. But what oneness can we have with the earth when we have no such oneness, no such relationship with ourselves? Now for the true investigation of the solutions. When we spoke about imagination being a totality of experience, that's a magical act. A magical act is one that affects you physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, the lot, in one. Actually, very few things do that. Nature, obviously. Music is another. It becomes hard to think of any other. There are other ones, of course. The center of Nietzsche's teachings, it almost becomes a joke to think how this man was so utterly misinterpreted. It's almost a subject in itself. It would make you weep. The center of his theories of consciousness, of the whole problem of existence, and technically he is an existentialist, is this concept of getting out of this, getting out of the reason, getting out of the mind, deconstructing all this nonsense, all the religion, all the mysterium. But what good are you if you don't replace it with something else? Well, if you read a lot of Nietzsche people, you'd think he never replaced it with anything else. You'd think this man ran around with a sledgehammer, debunking and destroying and, breaking down and slandering and histrionics, and yet quite the reverse. And nothing could be further from the truth. He replaced it with what you might want to refer to as the aesthetic experience, the aesthetic life, the aesthetic experience, the aesthetic life, in fact. And that is because in each individual's life, even a child, but think back to the primitive man. These two things now run along parallel. You have the Hegelian historical process, when what we're going to describe happened to the first man somewhere back when. And it also happens coterminously in the individual life of an individual stereotypical person. And that is this act of one day, while you're plowing the field, milking the goat, or even watching your army proceed to war, bringing water from the well, something happens. If you watch the movie Fearless with Jeff Bridges, he goes through it on the airplane that's about to crash. Suddenly, a man or a woman looks up, a child looks up, and is struck with something. And it's called awe of the unimaginable beauty of a sunset, or the unimaginable beauty of the ocean, or the flowers, or something in the spring air. And that awe response is not mental. It's total. It's of the imagination, and it's what's known as aesthetic experience. And in fact, our very first link with the universe, the first opening of the communication portal, was that. The universe spoke to us by its pure beauty. And Nietzsche was incredibly conscious of this, to such an extent that he became obsessed with it. And to him, anything but this experience was livid, morbid, and vile. And when one understands this, you understand why the man was a few shillings short of a pound note. You understand it. Why he wanted to throw the moneylenders out. And he couldn't think of how to rip it down. How do you tear this lie down? Now this awe doesn't happen rationally. You're not measuring the sun, thinking how far is it, is the ocean going in or out, let me analyze the green color of it, or this is the Pacific Ocean, not the Atlantic, let me tell you all about it. It's none of that stuff. It's something immediate. It's something awesome, right? Now, we're working with people who are trying to limit it down, package it, or virtualize it. And what is the tool that you use for all of this magic? Simple perception. Nothing rational required, simple perception. As a matter of fact, the aesthetic experience was the origin of science. First, man had the awe. This is brought up by Hegel, concedes this. That when man looked up and saw the beauty of the mountains and the mist and the clouds, or the animals and the dew on the deer, right? And he saw it, or the beauty of a tree. That is the origin of the curiosity that later led to science. So these bloody scientists don't realize that it is this totality of experience that gave rise to that which is their scientism. Because that is how you got curious about what that thing is and went to look at it and fondle it and discover it and understand it. And in the end, make it symbolic for you, you see. The horse, the lion, all of this. The fascination that became science opened up with an immediate, full brain, omnipotent, plastic, omnidirectional response that Nietzsche was absolutely devoted to. His philosophy is total about this. That's when you hear all this rhetoric about the Dionysian and the Apollonian and all of this nonsense that people have misinterpreted. This is what he was exploring, and he was caught up in it. Alvin Boyd Kuhn says that thinking which does not start from and continue in close relation to its foundation in the physical universe must lead to falsity. When that cord is severed, when man is not using the earth to instruct him, when he's being guided by the misguided, how could it possibly lead to anything but the disaster that we see all around us today? Nature is the instructor. So, as these people like Nietzsche understood, we're not thinking. Heidegger says the most thought-provoking thing in our thought-provoking time is that we are still not thinking. And boy, is he right, because thinking for him is not some mechanical action of the brain that some computer is going to do tomorrow. And my little magical 8-level chess set can do pretty much as good as I can. No, no, no. Thinking is something vaster than that. He too was speaking about this aesthetic response. Now, a spontaneous response to nature's vastness and beauty is fundamental to healthy, authentic existence. It is a direct and total experience involving mind, heart, and body. It is not contrived and is, in fact, the self responding to its own majesty. When you go out to her, you're looking in a mirror, by the way. Now, the aesthetic response is possible because of what we are, not what we have become. Of course, the designs of our cities, again, I emphasize this, the designs of our towns, our cities, prevents this. Nobody can sew on a button today, let alone dig a well. There's no artisans anymore. We're not truly productive. We know nothing about the earth. In fact, as I said, kind of joking about it, our relationship with nature is almost recreational to an incredible degree. But that's not a relationship with nature. Catherine Froger, an expert on Nietzsche, she says that it is important that human beings maintain a kind of awe with respect to the greater whole of which we are a part, since this not only provides us with an important fountain of meaning, but also prevents us from trying to engage in destructive conquest of the world, which is our home. The sensibility and capacity, once awakened, is the main characteristic that serves to separate one human being from another. This is my writing. So I'm saying that you can divide people. We've spoken about 2 or 3 ways to divide the human race. This is another one, a very important one. The sensibility and capacity, once awakened, is the main characteristic that serves to separate one human being from another. It is the manner by which authenticity and individuality are achieved. This is because an aesthetic response to the landscape or a piece of music or whatever it might be, just sitting looking at the light coming through the window, cannot be shared or quantified. It is an act to and for the self. It can't be measured. Each person's response is their own. We had all the collectivism we've explained, right? And it can be toppled like a house of cards in 1 second by this Nietzschean theory. Because it is purely an individual thing. Topically, we like to say, yeah, you felt moved by that piece of music as I did. You know, this is just daily stuff. Ultimately, when you really go into the experience, it is not in any way the same. It is absolutely unique because it's something that's coming out of your own self. What such an experience evokes within you is yours alone. And that center of privacy, that ownership, is the first act of individuality and independence. But all the other forms are pseudo-versions. Or, largely, as we say, sharing between 2 or more people. That's the complete antithesis of this. Now, the aesthetic sensibility is activated by way of perception. We were born with a capacity for perception and with the organs of perception. We were born with eyes. Moreover, we are born with a capacity of awe. We did not create the organs or the capacity. Furthermore, we did not create the object of our awe. We did not create the beauty that surrounds, we merely perceive it. And the ancient Arya and that kind of people, the Druids, the Shaman, aware of this. That's why they have reverence towards it. They damn well know they didn't create it and bring it into being. That's why they protect it. Look where we are today. in one of the most ancient texts of India, the Srimad Bhagavatam. Ancient text, almost undateable. Here's what you read. Aryans do not kill even the smallest plant unnecessarily, not to speak of cutting trees for sense gratification. Aryans do not distinguish between lower and higher grades of life. All life should be protected. All living beings have the right to live, even the trees and plants. This is the basic principle of an Aryan civilization. And they didn't mean Aryan in the way it's been portrayed to us. Arya is anyone who is of the truth, in any culture, in any race. Back to Fromm's biophilia and necrophilia. Biophilia is the passionate love of life and of all that is alive. It is the wish to further growth, whether in a person, a plant, an idea, or a social group. The biophilious person wants to be more rather than to have more. Alan Watts, speaking on the same subject, says, lack of knowledge about the evolution of the organic from the inorganic, coupled with misleading myths about coming into this world from somewhere outside, has made it difficult for us to see that the biosphere arises or goes with a certain degree of geological and astronomical evolution. As Douglas E. Harding has pointed out, we tend to think of this planet as a life-infested rock, which is as absurd as thinking the body as a cell-infested skeleton. Surely all forms of life, including man, must be understood as symptoms of the Earth, the solar system, and the galaxy, in which case we cannot escape the conclusion that the galaxy is intelligent. Heidegger put it this way. You're sitting here, or you're writing on a piece of paper. That paper sits upon the desk. The desk sits upon the floor. The floor sits upon the foundations of the house. The house sits upon the earth. The earth sits upon what? Right? The universe. And on it goes. Everything is nestled in everything else. The apple on the tree cannot be considered distinct from anything else around it, because it's on the twig, that's on the branch, that's on the bough, that's on the trunk, that's on the ground, and in the soil. And the soil is part of the earth, of which is nestled in the universe, and so on and so on and so on. So how can anything be separate from anything else? These are these misleading points that Watts is talking about. We do not come into this world, we come out of it as leaves from a tree, as the ocean waves. The universe peoples. Why we don't see this is because of this narrow, false way of seeing. The alteration, helped by all the neurosis and whatever else, the false, narrow way of seeing. Way of seeing, very important. Alvin Boyd Kuhn puts it in the best language you could imagine. The real Maya, right? The Vedic term for the cage of the world, the home of the spirit, into which you're locked and incarcerated. Wrong. And they are wrong. You just go back before them. Go back to the original tantric earlier religions from which they have arisen. So it's completely the opposite. It's all priest lip. Mushroom heads. Kuhn jumps in and says, the real Maya or illusion is not the natural forms, but the mind's propensity to conceive or project forms created by its own inventiveness, but which do not agree with the truth extant or potential in nature. So the Maya in which these priests think they're caught, and which whole cults of Sai Babas and God knows what Anandas have risen up, are based in an understanding that is completely false. Aberrant thinking is the Maya. Looking at Ishvara, looking at Prakriti, looking at the Maya, right, with the distorted eyes is the Maya, not that itself. That inverts a hell of a lot when you fully understand the depth of that. The quantum scientist Werner Heisenberg says it another way. He says, what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of understanding. Yeah, our demented method of understanding. But you in this life can change that. Freud called for oceanic experience to get out of the pathology. He called for what we're talking about right here. He said it's very, very necessary. Very, very necessary. Crucial to heal the antipathy. Oceanic experiences. Go out and be there. Go out and talk to nature. Develop a relationship like you have done all your life with people who give you back all them cues and affectations. You think that it's only human beings that exist in this world? What about the inanimate things? Joke. Inanimate. Look at that. What more hierarchical, territorial speciesism could we have, right? And again, it's not what you experience, it's the way that you do it. The guy beside you, the girl beside you may not get it at all. Doesn't matter about them. And you're not meant to impose upon them either or force them, because that's an act of violence on their consciousness. They are where they need to be, as you need to be where you are. Them to talk to you and turn you away from the way you are is an act of psychic violence. You to take them out of their ignorance is an act of psychic violence. Neither one is justified. Aniela Jaff says that in alchemy, the prime material, right, that's the basis of all things, was often represented by such monstrous and fabulous creatures, mixed forms of animals. In psychological terms, they would probably symbolize the original total consciousness out of which the individual ego can rise and begin to develop towards maturity. So in other words, the earliest form of that which was real was symbolized by animals, as we see in the Egyptian. That's because they had reverence towards nature. But what did we get 5 minutes later? Pope Pius IX did not permit a society for the prevention of cruelty to animals to be founded in Rome because, as he declared, theology teaches that man owes no duty to any animal. In fact, the word animal actually means, purely literally, bad spirit. Anima. With an A on the front, right? The opposite. Mal being evil. How about that? The Egyptians are telling you that the animal represents your inner sense, the inner archetypes, the inner template. We know that even now that animals heal people. They actually heal the sick, bring people out of comas and all that. Bad spirits. We touched on it earlier about the the difficulty of even penetrating the mind, penetrating the unconscious. Alongside that is this other bizarre fallacy that it's a place to be looking in anyway. When most people even talk topically about the unconscious, you get this idea that it's some sort of dark cellar, or some attic. Norman Bates. Some dark little hangout for Dracula's coffin. It's all nonsense. It's not a place. You can't open the mind and look. It's a way of seeing. Who brings this out? Who emphasized this over and over again? The Freuds didn't listen. They went off in another direction. There was a great productivity in doing that. But Grodak had it all along. There's no circuitry of the superego and it's connected to this and all. It's not like, it's an anatomy, but it's not like that. It's not an anatomy in the head. It's an anatomy of perception, a way of seeing. Grodak is most careful to insist that the id is not a thing in itself, but merely a way of seeing. Well then, what do you need psychologists for? What do you need any experts for? You can change your way of seeing instantly. You are the only one who can. The mechanical model is for all the guys in the white coats to get in there and mess with it. Monty Python, giving birth in the Graham Chapman and his contraptions. Right? That's what that's all about. Saw your leg off. They love that because that's like, we can now get in there and fix you. How can you fix a way of seeing? In fact, in Greek, the word for I know, right? That word also means I have seen. Now, on one level, it seems kind of obvious. But to see, to perceive, is the same word as to know. And let's not forget the perception is both external, right, the world, and internal. The inner being the imagination body. But even when the way of seeing is turned inside, even when perception is turned inside, it's still a way of seeing. The way of seeing yourself, either sadistically or non-sadistically. And again, back to Ponty's original point. You, by being existent, this thing called an I, this ability to perceive, nucleates opposites like we began with. Because you are an object as much as any object that you would look at. But you are the subject. So to all intents and purposes, the very act of perception, how simple this is, concertinas opposites and duality out of existence. No paths, no gurus, no incense waving, no mushroom concoctions and dancing over coals and swinging from what God knows what. No evangelist tents and baptisms and holy books. You already are it. And Julian Jaynes said that nothing in consciousness, there's nothing there. There's nothing in consciousness that is not an analog of something that was in behavior first. Now, on one level, right, that sounds very negative, right? It was a physicalist, physicalist, materialist. No. We already talked about the physicalist. That's not the same thing. So your body transcends duality. No man, no single being that has ever lived had a clearer and more perceptive and more accurate understanding of the role of the body physical than Wilhelm Reich. And subsequently, one would also mention Alexander Lau and his prodigy. The fact that Wilhelm Reich died in a federal stockade, of course, yeah, just incidental. Try to heal people, you know. It sucks. But the keys of enlightenment lie in his work. For one reason, enlightenment has very little to do with light, which we'll get to in a minute. In his schemata, again, very stripped down, remember we touched on that thing at the profundus, that the self exists in the pits and the depths, in Hades, as opposed to heaven, so to speak. Well, the same analog we come across in Wilhelm Reich's theory of the bioenergy of the body, the life force, the very thing that keeps us alive every second of every minute. And the bioenergy being the song of life, being the very gift that we've got from the universe, right? In his schemata, the surface, or up, is the surface skin of the body, the outer shell. The core is downwards in their scheme, towards the core. And here's the real masterstroke. Did you know that he followed in Grodek's steps to deconstruct this whole model of the mind? He really took up that piece and believed that the ego is in fact the body, particularly the skin, the surface of the body. This can be quite difficult for those who are not familiar with this. And that the self, instead of being up here, as we said, in that dark cavern, you know, the self is the core of the bioenergy, where it radiates from within, in the core of the center. Or down, as opposed to up. Right? Do you see what this means on one level? All that rhetoric about, you know, oh yeah, descending energy from the crown chakra and all this stuff. Outside of you, in other words, is a lot of bunk. Energy pulsates from within to the surface and back again, not from up to down. This is, again, this infection of this false yoga, false religious claptrap. The energy can go a lot of places, but it actually pulsates from the core to the surface of the body. The same way when you fall asleep, that's what's happening. It's retracting, it's not going up. Your energy is flagging and it's retracting to the core, and the body becomes flaccid and you go to sleep. And when you wake up, it's flushing to the surface again. Where have we heard that before? Right? The ancient Arya, the Vedics, it's similar to the chakra system, is it not? The core, at least. It's the old Aryan teaching, nothing is new. They also call it the Mesla, the Fohat, the Shushumna, the serpent energy. Julian Jaynes has pointed out that the subjective space is a recent phenomenon. Studies of primitive peoples show that they have no words for emotions, or that their explanations of subjective and emotional states are restricted to explanations of the external space and situation, or to their sensations at the time. This implies that the body and ego should be considered the same thing. That's right. Reams and reams of research show that there is no recollection or verbalizing of inner emotional experiences. It's the space that they're in, meaning the place that the body, skin, registers, because you have to have, the skin is registering what's happening, right? Your outer surface is the antenna. So all descriptions of experience were that, which goes a long way to proving what Reich's point was. One miracle of the body is the simple spine. They talk about the thing about the bumblebees, now shouldn't be able to fly, and what a few of these other ones. My God, the spine, you shouldn't even be able to stand up, if you think about it. You shouldn't be able, if you had a skeleton here, right, and you hung it up by one of those hooks, that's why it has to be hung up with a hook. If you took the hook off, the thing will crumble to the ground. And it doesn't matter if there's some fatty tissue and flesh and bone and muscle is put there. The skeleton, we should not be able to stand up with the big cavity here and the weight of the neck and the spine itself. We should be all 90 degrees over. How come we're not? The bioenergy of the body. And the cellular intelligence, the concentration. Think of the language of the body. Think of it. If you are in a state of concentration, your body posture will show it to a second person, won't it? That you're concentrated. If you're sitting playing an instrument of any kind, your posture and your focus and your body has altered its posture. If you're in an attitude of reverence or prayer, there's a whole different look about your face, as we can see in the medieval art. If you're in fear, they say your skin crawls, right? Or your hands shake or the breath becomes shorter. Your body is doing something. The body is acting. If you feel embarrassed, your face reddens, right? If you get angry, your legs often tremble. If there's danger, you say the hair stands up at the back of our necks. When we have awe, our eyes often get wider. When there's sexual arousal, we have vitality.